Hey, Browns fans, welcome into a live edition of the Dog Check podcast here, following the Browns' 20-16 loss to the Philadelphia Eagles right here in Philly, as you can see behind me. If you're watching the video, guys, just uh, where do we start except for with the same problems seem to persist with this team, and it's very very frustrating at this point. I hope that this next conversation together can serve as some sort of therapy, a venting session, if you will, because it's all very frustrating for the Browns right now as they continue to have more of the same problems and not so many answers to solve them. It is Spencer German with you here on the Dog Check Podcast. Appreciate you guys jumping in. I do want to thank, as always, our friends at Bet Online for their continued support of this show and many of the shows throughout the Believe network of podcasts. We wouldn't be here without them. And if you want to go bet on the NFL each and every single week, you can do that at Bet Online. Browns this week were 9.5 point favorites. They did cover. So if you were inclined to play the Browns, you hopefully won some money today. But obviously, you can bet each and every single week on every single game across the NFL landscape and across the NFL schedule. And maybe you're going to be sick of betting the Browns because they keep letting you down. Although they did cover the spread this week, you can always find more games to bet on over at Bet Online. Also, if after the Browns game, like tonight, if you want to sit down and decompress a little bit from another loss, you can play blackjack, poker, or even their online slot machines. It's all available to you at Bet Online. The game starts here, and the game here in Philly has ended for the Browns, 20-16. Again, your final score as they fall to 1-5 now on the season. And listen, guys, like I understand that the team continues to kind of send this message of, hey, division games still on the table, still on the schedule. AFC games, a lot of those still on the table, still on the schedule. So this thing is not over by any means. It is a long season. And I can understand where that's going to be a point of emphasis for this team moving forward in terms of how they keep their spirits up, how they keep morale high. The idea that, hey, just because we're 1-5 doesn't mean that we have to end here. Our season's over. We can't dig ourselves out of this hole. It's going to be tough, but it's still possible. It's still a possibility. But like, I don't know how there can be much faith left that happens, even though that is the case. Yes, most of your losses to this point are against NFC teams, but your record is what your record is. You're 1-5. Your margin for error is so small at this point. I mean, we always like to sort of project like what the line to make the playoffs is going to be. Is it 10-7? Is it 9-8? And even if you were to get to that mark, like you can only lose three more games the rest of the way, and that seems like it's going to be tough for the Browns to pull off when you're in a tough division against a Steelers team that's obviously very good, a Ravens team that, or maybe that isn't very good, but that is always seems to play you tightly, a Ravens team that's obviously very good, and a Bengals team that has Joe Burrow at the helm. And even though you've owned them in recent years, he can still play, and this Bengals team has sort of started to play a little bit better football. It's all just very concerning. So I don't know that there's like I don't know how the fan base feels about this or how you guys feel about this, but the idea that there's still a lot of games ahead of them, I just don't. I just think people hear that and they roll their eyes, and I can understand why. Now, as far as today's game went, what's frustrating about it the most is that it's the same problems persisting each and every single week that are killing this team. And there are some alarming stats at this point in regards to this offense that are just too glaring to ignore as issues for this team. And I don't know what the answer is or the solution is to solve them. I really don't. I have no answers for you. I have no ideas. It starts with the fact that this offense has now gone 0 for 29 scoring touchdowns in their last 29 possessions. They have not scored a touchdown. I mean, that's ridiculous. You're not going to win football games if you can't punch it in for six. You can't win a football game if you're just settling for field goals all the time. That is a disastrous type of stat for this team, and one that obviously speaks to just how dreadful the offense has been for the majority of the season. There's also the fact that they went 26 straight third down attempts dating back over the last couple of weeks without converting a third down. It took until the second to last play of the third quarter to finally convert a third down in this game. And then they converted a second one in the same drive, like two plays into the fourth quarter. So like they're just not doing the things that you need to do to win football games. And it's everybody. Like I understand there's a lot of animosity towards Deshaun, and we continue to harp on the fact that he hasn't been good enough. And that is very true that he hasn't been good enough. I will subscribe to that take as well. But it continues to be more than just him. Offensive line issues, and now more injuries on the offensive line are piling up. Nick Harris, the latest, he goes out today with an injury, and we're talking about a team now that's playing a guy who usually plays guard at center today. Like, that's not great. 5 more sacks they gave up. The pre-snap penalties. This game was never really out of reach, but they made it out of reach because of the self-inflicted wounds once again. But so going back to that, like, fourth down, or really the in the fourth quarter, a couple minutes left, trying to drive down and to tie the game down 20-13. You have an opportunity there to try to score a touchdown. You get the ball to the 3-yard line, and then you go false start, completed pass for no gain, basically, and then another false start on fourth down that puts you now back far enough where Kevin Stefanski gets skittish and says, I don't want to go for it anymore. Let's kick the field goal with our 3 timeouts and see if we can get the ball back with like 3 minutes to go in the game. We'll take our chances. Like, it's that type of stuff. It's in the second quarter with I think it was about 5:25 to go. Deontay Foreman breaks off a big run play, takes it down into the red zone. That play's called back because of a hold. That one was ticky-tack, but still, it was a hold nonetheless. It was called. You got to live with the results, and that one gets called back. It's in the third quarter, 11:20-ish to go in the game, or in the third quarter. You have a third down in one play, and Kevin Stefanski runs an end around with Cedric Tillman that gets stuffed for a loss of 5, and then you settle for a field goal, which Dustin Hopkins misses. That was the first possession out of the half after you had built some momentum because you had this great play by Myles Garrett to block a field goal. Rodney McLeod scoops it and scores, takes it to the end zone, and you tie the game to go to the half. Well, make the most of that with a scoring drive out of the break, but they can't because of the self-inflicted wounds and the penalties and the bad plays and the bad play calling. And that's where Kevin Stefanski comes into all this as well, because he hasn't been great with certain situational plays and things that he's doing in that regard. He hasn't been great in terms of this offense as a whole, which was supposed to be catered around Deshaun Watson, and whatever blended scheme they built with his ideals and Ken Dorsey's ideals, it has just not been very smooth. It has been a slog. It has been a mess, and there seems to be no end in sight for this group to kind of figure this out and get it together. I don't know where else to look and where else to turn. But this offense really does turn back. Like, they turn back the clock on football. Like, it is something from the Stone Age in terms of the offense that we're seeing, the way that they play. And I thought even on a day where you felt like there was some life shown, I understand when you don't get into the end zone, it's hard to say that. But in the second half, I thought this group showed some poise. They had some decent drives down the field. The one that got to the 3-yard line, most notably, which was set up largely by a big play, a 35-yard pass from Deshaun to Jerry Jeudy as he was kind of streaking over the middle. It was one of his best passes. He made another nice play to Amari Cooper. Like, there was moments throughout this game where the offense showed at least like it was competent and it could do some things and it could get you in scoring position and it could put up some points. And then they just get down near the goal line and they either get stoned by the opponent or they stone themselves because they shoot themselves in the foot with a penalty or something boneheaded that cost them points. It is absurd how bad that's been. You're 6 weeks into the season and it's the same old issues. I thought it was interesting. Like, Deshaun Watson was asked after the game, how do you fix things like pre-snap penalties at this point? And he didn't have an answer. He paused for a good 15 seconds trying to think of an answer as to what they're supposed to do from here to fix problems that continue to just plague this team in regards to the pre-snap penalties or just penalties in general. And he didn't have an answer for you because they've obviously tried to emphasize it and it hasn't worked. So I don't understand where else you go or what else you do when clearly the message just isn't getting through. And maybe that does fall back to the feet of Kevin Stefanski and the head coach here. I will say this in regards to the offense showing some life. Deshaun Watson in the second half, reminiscent sort of that Ravens game last year that everybody likes to bring up. 11-12, 122 yards in the second half. Pretty solid from him. He did show some more poise, but there was enough plays in the first half where he was still soaring the ball on players, dirtying the ball on guys, didn't necessarily see things great on in certain moments as well, which are the same conversations we've had with him. So I know I sound like a broken record, bringing this up for the second consecutive week, and really all season it's been the conversation. I just don't understand at this point. If you're 6 weeks in, you haven't fixed these problems. No one's coming to save you. Nobody's coming to save you. There's not some magic elixir that's going to make it all go away unless you just start playing better. And the Browns have run out of time to get themselves in order and get themselves right. Like it's now or never. If they don't come out next week and play a good game against the Bengals to get a win, like you're talking about, then what does it look like at the trade deadline? Are you just selling off pieces and our guys going to start quitting? Like there's only so much a team can take in terms of morale if you're going to keep losing games. So it's all very frustrating. And like I said, even though Deshaun showed some promise, he still has some flaws in his game that continue to be issues as well. And Kevin Stefanski was adamant once again. He's sticking with Deshaun Watson. No change there, but that's not surprising. I feel for Browns fans because at some point, if you're not going to change something, if you're not going to do anything differently with this offense, you're basically just punting on the season and saying it's about figuring out what you have in Deshaun. And I don't like that. Like I don't want to stand for this. I don't want this team to stand for in a year that was supposed to be special and playoff run and maybe more. Like this was always supposed to be about so much more than just like figuring out if this quarterback can really huff it or not. And so that's frustrating. But that's the reality that we live in right now with this team. And until they really figure out how to fix some of these issues, they're not really going anywhere. Like they're just going to continue to be stuck in the mud, and the same problems are going to rear their ugly head. And I do think, like, let's just face it, guys. Like from what I understand, Kevin Stefanski is not being empowered to make the decision or make the call on Deshaun Watson. And if that's true, that's fine. I mean, it's not fine per se, but it's fine from the sense of like that's what the organization wants to do. Okay, fine. There's nothing you can do about it. But if he's not being empowered to make that decision at the end of the year, who takes the blame for a season that has been this bad and an offense that has been this bad with an offensive-minded coach who already scapegoated his offensive coordinator last year, brought in a new offensive coordinator, and like is firing Ken Dorsey really the answer? I just don't know if that's going to be the case. So if it comes down to Deshaun or Kevin Stefanski, I don't know what the solution is there, because one guy's at least in Stefanski stabled the ship of an organization that has been obviously problematic and has been able to get out of its own way in the previous 2 decades. But the other guy is kind of just a hired gun who isn't getting the job done either. Usually the quarterback wins in that scenario, though. So I don't know if anybody gets fired. I don't know if the way I feel like it's going to go right now, both those guys are going to be here in 2025. But I just think this is setting up for even more questions as the season continues, and all of us just ripping our hair out to understand like why nothing is going to change. And there were maybe some small, minute changes to this game. There was a little more under center today. They ran the ball from under center today and seemed to make it more of a point to run the football today, which I thought was good. They averaged 4 yards per carry, which is a solid uptick from what they've had in recent weeks. But it's not enough, or it wasn't enough to get points on the scoreboard. I mean, this defense and special teams with the play that they made on the blocked field goal, which, by the way, Myles Garrett, just a freak of nature still. And that's the one play people can take away from this game and be like, I remember that play because it was a special one because Myles Garrett is that type of player. And then Rodney McLeod scoops and scores. Like, they gave you a touchdown. They gifted you some points, and they made it so that the rest of the way of this game, after the Browns had kicked a field goal to make it 10-3, and then they scored a tie going into the half, the game was never outside of a single possession out of reach for Cleveland. And the offense still couldn't get it done. They haven't scored 20 points yet in a game. They're the only team in the NFL who hasn't done that. And it's, again, I don't mean to, again, just keep repeating a lot of the same things, but the problems on this with this offense aren't getting resolved. And it's truly, it's, I'm out of answers. Yes, you have the luxury of still playing your division games. You have the luxury of still playing a lot of AFC games, but what evidence do we have to this point that those things are going to get resolved when you're 6 weeks in, still dealing with the same problems that you've seen for the first 5 weeks and now the first 6 weeks? There isn't any. There's just absolutely no evidence that they're going to be able to correct this thing or get this figured out. And for that reason, here we are, 1-5 on the season, and looking for answers that don't seem like they're coming anytime soon. Now, the one saving grace, I guess, to next week, and this is the one thing that maybe Browns fans can get excited about for a return home to Huntington Bank Field, and something that maybe gets butts in seats next week. Nick Chubb is due back for the Browns in making his 2024 debut after the gruesome knee injury last year in week 2 against the Steelers. He is going to be playing in this game for Cleveland next week. And so maybe that's the momentum boost or the jolt that this offense needs. But like I said, injuries on the offensive line, pre-snap penalties, those aren't things that Nick Chubb solves. Those are things that each individual player has to sort of solve on their own and get corrected. The injury thing, not so much, but the pre-snap penalties, the attention in detail, the holding calls, all those different things, like the shooting yourself in the foot, are avoidable. Nick Chubb doesn't save you from those. He might save a bad offensive line that's banged up if they can't quite create the biggest hole for him. But he's not going to be able to save this offense from the doldrums that they're living in right now. So I understand why that's an exciting thing, and it should be an exciting thing for fans because we know what Nick Chubb means and represents to this team, to this fan base, to the city of Cleveland. But in terms of that being like I don't even think it's that, but to have that be some sort of like savior type moment, Nick Chubb walks in and saves the day. That's very lofty expectations for one player, particularly a running back, to be the answer to an offense that is clearly just without an identity and has no sense of direction at this point, which is disappointing because you're 6 weeks in and you would have thought by now they'd have it figured out. But here we are, 1-5 on the season, returning home after a 3-game road trip where you lost all 3 games, and you're looking for anything to sort of grasp onto to find momentum, to feel good about this team. And so I feel bad that you guys have to sort of suffer through this right now with this team, but hopefully they can turn it around and live up to what they're saying, which is we know we have these division games and we know that we can still make some noise if we just start stringing something together starting next week against the Cincinnati Bengals. I know hopes are low. That's the message the team is sending. We'll see what they do in week 7. But for now, that's going to do it. Spencer German with you. Appreciate you guys jumping on in for this impromptu episode. I guess not impromptu. It's just a post-game episode. We like to do these after the game and just react with you guys to what was today, obviously another disappointing loss for Cleveland's offense. But I do appreciate you guys stopping on by the Dog Check, part of the Believe Network of podcasts, and of course, airing on Bally Sports across the great state of Ohio. I will be back with Eric Metcalf for our usual Tuesday midweek episode, and we'll pick Eric's brain on how he felt watching this game today. I'm sure it was very reminiscent of the Washington game last week and the Raiders game the week before that, and whatever else, the other games that have been just absolute disasters for this team all year. But we'll see what Eric has to say, and we very much look forward to that conversation. Until next time, I appreciate you guys stopping on in. And even though it's disgruntled, or maybe in a not quite excited way, I will still always holler out to you guys and give you a Go Browns.